Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. The village of Eklutna lies within Alaska's largest city, Anchorage. The village of approximately 70 people is going toe-to-toe with the state over a tribal gaming operation. At the center of the legal dispute is whether the Alaska Native allotments the facility sits on fall under the legal definition of Indian country. Village leadership is also dedicated to revitalizing salmon runs and mitigating damage caused by climate change. We'll hear more about Eklutna and the community's goals after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Jill Freitas. Researchers and local experts gathered in Bethel last week to share environmental knowledge. As KYUK's Samantha Watson reports, the conference highlighted the power of linking Indigenous knowledge with Western science across the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta.
It's the beginning of the Western Alaska Interdisciplinary Science Conference. But before everyone gets down to work, organizer Katie Basil asks them to stop and
think about resilience and abundance in Western Alaska. What does that look like?
Basil, with the Alaska Sea Grant, which organized the conference, says it's hard not to get bogged down by the difficult issues the region is facing. Many of those problems are informing research presented this week: salmon fisheries in decline, permafrost erosion, and the devastation of ex-typhoon Halong. Basil says this gathering is also an opportunity to imagine what things could lead to a better future.
What conversations can we have this week that will connect us to a narrative of abundance and resilience?
The conference is in its 18th year, and it rotates between Western Alaska communities. Bridging Indigenous knowledge with Western science took center stage at the conference. Joanne Slatz is the mayor of Napakiak. She spoke about growing up in the village.
The package to stay frozen, we had to dig a hole on the ground. The permafrost was about 2 feet.
Today, Slatz says stronger fall storms, including October's ex-typhoon Halong, have been a new piece of the village's relationship with its environment.
90% of the homes experienced water getting into their homes.
Nicole Herman Mercer with the U.S. Geological Survey presented a project that couples collecting interviews with locals and climate data surrounding extreme weather events in YK Delta communities.
So we set out to develop finer scale climate data coupled with community narratives to create storylines of change.
Organizers said a record-breaking 160 people registered to participate at the conference this year. In Bethel, I'm Samantha Watson.
A memorandum of understanding has been signed by Great Sioux Nation tribal leaders and the U.S. Forest Service that allows collaborative stewardship of the Black Elk Wilderness in South Dakota. Brian Bull of Buffalo's Fire reports.
Last month, members of both parties signed the MOU in an event that also included a hike up Black Elk Peak. The wilderness comprises more than 13,000 acres in the Black Hills National Forest and was created in 1980. Boyd Gorno is chairman of the Lower Brule Sioux Tribe, one of the 11 tribes represented in the agreement. He says this is an especially important development for Native youth.
Our children are one of the most important resources for the future of our nation. We want our kids to have a chance to visit the sacred lands our ancestors roamed free at one time.
Gorno said he wished the parties would have signed a memorandum of agreement, as he considers that more binding. Ultimately, he'd like to see all the land returned to tribes. In a release, the U.S. Forest Service said the MOU enhances opportunities for tribal guidance, knowledge, and consultation regarding wilderness management, resource protection, recreation, and cultural interpretation. For National Native News, I'm Brian Bull.
And I'm Jill Freitas.
National Native News is produced by Kawanak Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Support for law and justice-related programming provided by Hobbs, Strauss, Dean & Walker, LLP, a national law firm dedicated to promoting and defending tribal rights for over 40 years. More information available at hobbsstrauss.com.
Hear that? Tribal college faculty do so much, one can't say it all here. Nothing but respect. Visit mostthoroughdjobdescription.com. The American Indian College Fund supports this program.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce, broadcasting live for Day 2 of the Arctic Encounter Summit in Anchorage, Alaska. It is 9 a.m. here in the City of Lights and Flowers, and the conference is already in full swing as attendees file past our booth situated on the third floor of the Dena'ina Civic and Convention Center in downtown Anchorage. Sitting across from me is Eklutna President Aaron Leggett, who kicked off this year's Arctic Encounter Summit with a land acknowledgement, reminding visitors and attendees that the state's largest city sits on Dena'ina Athabascan lands. The native village of Eklutna is a tiny community with fewer than 70 residents, but is breaking ground on several legal and environmental fronts. The village is forging ahead with plans to develop a permanent gaming hall with more than 700 electronic gaming machines. But that vision is threatened by a federal policy change. We'll talk with President Leggett about gaming and other initiatives the community is championing, like salmon and river water restoration. Later in the hour, we'll speak with two Yupik elders about environmental threats to their community of St. Lawrence Island. You as a listener can join this conversation with comments and questions. Just call us at 1-800-996-2848. That number is also 1-800-99-NATIVE. Joining us now from the Arctic Encounter Summit is President Aaron Leggett. He is with the village of Eklutna, and he is, of course, Dena'ina Athabascan. President Leggett, it's a pleasure to have you back on the show. Welcome back.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We're here at this fascinating conference, the Arctic Encounter Summit, world leaders, stakeholders gathering to talk about policy and the future of the Arctic. What discussions do you hope happen here today?
Well, I think overall, certainly, it's an interesting time in the Arctic. You know, some of the geopolitical discussions that have been occurring over the last few years, obviously, without having Russian participation because of the war in Ukraine. Of course, the United States policy towards the Arctic. I know, there was the half-hearted suggestion that perhaps Greenland could become part of the United States around this time. Last year, I think, raised a lot of people's concerns. But overall, I think trying to keep those lines of communication open between all the Arctic nations of the United States, Canada, Greenland, Norway, Finland, Faroe Islands, Iceland, Sweden, and like I said, unfortunately, very limited Russian participation.
Mm-hmm. President Leggett, the last time we spoke with you on the show, we talked about the village of Eklutna pushing forward with a very ambitious plan to open a tribal gaming hall, despite Alaska having some of the strictest restrictions on gambling in the country. But there's a federal policy now that puts the permanent facility in jeopardy. Where are those plans at right now?
So, again, just for a little bit of history, in 2024, there was what was called an M opinion, a reversal of longstanding policy. With that, the native village of Eklutna proceeded getting our agreements, our lease agreements, and approval from the National Indian Gaming Commission, and we opened a temporary facility in January 20th of 2025. Since then, we've been in operation. We did a small expansion in the summer of 2025, and we're doing another expansion here that'll be opening in the middle of May. So right now we're operating in several temporary buildings while we wait to get more clarification on basically the fundamental issue, and that is, can the United States or the state of Alaska, can they treat native allotments in Alaska differently for the purposes of gaming than they would in the lower 48? And in the lower 48, if you recognize tribal sovereignty, and if tribes can demonstrate that they've exercised jurisdiction over those native allotments, there's off-site gaming facilities, and that's basically what we have in the native village of Eklutna. We have about 70 people that live in the village, but our total tribal membership's about 350, spread throughout Anchorage and the Mat-Su Valley and other places.
Now, as you mentioned, this issue boils down to whether or not native allotments that the gaming facility sits on meets this federal definition of Indian country. What are the arguments now being presented that it doesn't meet the federal definition of Indian country? What's the logic behind that?
Well, in September of 2025, basically, the Trump administration withdrew the M opinion. So that affects not just, obviously, the native village of Eklutna. There was a number of M opinions throughout for other tribes in the lower 48. I don't know all of them off the top of my head. But we've been seeking to get clarification on what that exactly means and have not been entirely successful. Right now, there are 2 lawsuits with the native village of Eklutna. One is from a group of homeowners near the facility. They have an attorney, a long-time anti-tribal attorney, a man by the name of Don Mitchell, and that's worked its way through the courts. And basically, what the courts have said, the lower courts have said, is that because of sovereign immunity, the tribe can't be sued unless it agrees to be sued. And so right now, that question is working its way through the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. We're pretty optimistic that, again, it'll come back and say that because of sovereign immunity that we can't be sued. And that's one of the key tenets that we argue in the state's lawsuit for this as well. So,
and to clarify, is the facility currently in operation? Is it open?
Absolutely. Open 7 days a week, 10 a.m. to 2 in the morning.
Well, tell me more about your hopes for the gaming hall going forward. What does it offer the community? And tell me a little bit also about the market that it is focused on primarily.
So the market it's focused on primarily are locals. We're seeing a lot of people from Anchorage, Eagle River, the Mat-Su Valley. We're averaging anywhere between 4 to, I think our record is 800 people a day come through the doors. And it's Class 2 gaming devices, so they operate what's called under a bingo model. Different states and different, tribes, some offer Class 2 gaming, some have Class 3. Class 3 being full Las Vegas style slot machines, table games, sports books, those kinds of things. Class 2 operate under what's called a bingo model. It's really kind of complicated, but basically the machines look very similar to what you would see in a lot of casinos in the lower 48.
Okay, and this is another interesting fact that might gain our listeners' attention here, especially folks who are familiar with tribal gaming in the lower 48. You don't allow Eklutna tribal members into the facility. Why is that?
A combination of things. We've looked at how different tribes have done it. I think the biggest reason that we don't allow our members to game there is we don't want the perception if one of our members was to hit a $25,000, $30,000 jackpot that somehow they had an insight to it, that it was rigged, that kind of thing.
Mm. Now, Eklutna is unique because it sits within the municipality of Anchorage. Describe the community for us and also the history there, because, of course, Eklutna has been around much, much longer than the city of Anchorage. And I watched a video with you a while back, and you talked about really, in the grand scheme of history, Anchorage is just a brief kind of blip on the clock of human time.
Yeah.
And you folks have been here since time immemorial.
Yeah, the Dena'ina, our ancestors moved here between 1,000 to 1,500 years ago from the interior, replacing another group that was living here before. But, the city of Anchorage, the largest city in Alaska, is about 110 years old. This area we're in right here by the Denina Civic and Convention Center in downtown. Anchorage is a few blocks from the mouth of Eklutna or Stickleback Creek, where we had fish camps. This time of year we'd be getting ready to come to those summer fish camps when the king salmon would return. Ship Creek, it's called in English, is also where literally the founding of Anchorage occurred. Anchorage was selected as the site for a federal railroad project going from the ice-free port of Seward all the way into the interior of Alaska. So between the founding of Anchorage and then, of course, the 1918 Spanish flu influenza epidemic, about half our population succumbed to that disease. And so by about 1920, for the first time in our history, we became the minority in our homeland. Like I said, we have about 350 tribal members, and Anchorage has a population, I think, today around 287,000. So we're not even the largest group of Alaska natives that live in Anchorage. I think Anchorage's native population is somewhere between 32 and 35,000. So we're a minority within a minority. But this is our traditional homeland. We've never left it. Our tribal headquarters are 26 miles north of Anchorage, right at the edge of the municipality of Anchorage.
President Aaron Leggett on our show today here at the Arctic Encounter Summit, representing the native village of Eklutna. And we're just getting the conversation started today here. And again, we are at the Arctic Encounter Summit, and there's a lot of hustle and bustle here right now at the Denina Center. A lot of folks are filing in and out of presentations and panels and various discussions. And we're going to continue our conversation on the other side of this break. And we do have our phone lines open, so callers are more than welcome to join the discussion. Again, especially folks up here in Alaska who are listening to the show today. Maybe you're in Anchorage, and maybe you are very familiar with the native village of Eklutna. Maybe you yourself are a member of the native village of Eklutna, and you'd like to join our conversation today. You can do that. Just call 1-800-996-2848. That number again, 1-800-996-2848, or just 1-800-99-NATIVE. Short break, and we'll be right back. Foreign diplomats, researchers, and lawmakers from as far away as Norway and Japan gather in Anchorage, Alaska to speak on the future of the Arctic. On our final broadcast at this year's Arctic Encounter Summit, we'll speak with more Indigenous leaders and an Alaska-based Samoan filmmaker on her work documenting Native cultures. That's on the next Native America Calling.
Who protects Indian country? Amerant does. As the only 100% tribally owned insurance carrier, Amerant helps strengthen tribal communities by providing reliable insurance coverage and keeping dollars in Indian country. From property and liability to commercial auto and tribal workers' compensation, Amerant is here to protect what matters. Celebrating 40 years of serving Indian country. Learn more at amerant.com. That's AMERIND.com.
Thank you for listening to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce, and we're speaking with Eklutna Village President Aaron Leggett about tribal gaming, also climate change and habitat loss. Later, we'll speak with two Yupik elders from St. Lawrence Island, Alaska, of course. We'll talk about environmental threats, and one of them being a contaminated World War II defense site. Listeners can join us at 1-800-996-2848. And President Leggett, before break, you talked about the history here in the city of Anchorage and, of course, the village of Eklutna. Let's click ahead now to 2026 and tell me, what is Eklutna's relationship with Anchorage city leadership?
We have a very good relationship with city leadership. We're quite proud of the fact that in 2020, I believe, we started in 2019, but in 2020, we signed an agreement between the municipality of Anchorage, the Anchorage Assembly, and Native Village says that the municipality, the assembly, and the Native Village of Eklutna tribal leadership, the council will meet twice a year to discuss issues of mutual concern or mutual benefit. We just had our first meeting of the year last week for that. We're very proud of the fact that we have this agreement, and that I think we're the second large city in the United States to do it. Albuquerque beat us to the punch, only because we spent more time studying it and making sure we had it fully developed. But it's really a landmark piece of legislation, I think, between a city government and a tribe.
Yeah, it really sounds like it. And also interesting to hear you mentioned the city of Albuquerque with a similar model. Let's talk about the village's efforts to mitigate the threats of climate change on your lands. And there is a melting glacier that the city of Anchorage and your village rely on for water. Describe that threat and how it might mirror other climate change issues we're hearing about in the Arctic.
Well, so about 90% of Anchorage's drinking water and about 3% of the city's renewable energy comes from the lake. There's a hydroelectric project on the head of the lake that has basically dried up the Eklutna River. The tribe has spent a considerable amount of time trying to get more water down the river to restore salmon habitat. But as far as the lake goes and the glacier, yes, it is melting, but they anticipate that it'll be around for at least another 100 years, so it won't be in my lifetime. But there are other environmental concerns, certainly, that we have. We have a super flood site near the village called Camp Mohawk. It was basically a U.S. Army storage area, and I think basically through not understanding the chemicals that were being used, these industrial cleaners and degreasers, they got onto the land, and then ultimately they went into the ground and unfortunately hit the water table. They're called PCBs. And now that it's in the water, to do full reclamation, the Corps of Engineers anticipates that it would cost between $500 and $750 million just on our one little site. So that gives you a window into Alaska and contamination. You're probably talking in the hundreds of billions of dollars to clean up all of the environmental contamination, largely from the military, but not exclusively.
All right, one more question before we bring in our other guests. Salmon habitat restoration, another issue that you're passionate about. What's the status of restoring salmon here in recent years?
Well, unfortunately, we're not made as much progress as we would like. This is, again, we have a key partner with the municipality of Anchorage that we want to see salmon habitat restoration. We're continuing to keep pressure and efforts up to get more water down the Eklutna River. Our argument is that by doing that, by being able to put another major salmon-producing stream into Upper Cook Inlet, that it's not just good and the right thing to do for the native village of Eklutna, but it's good for all residents of South Central Alaska. Right now, especially king salmon, are almost non-existent in Cook Inlet. Last year, for the first time in my lifetime, there was no sport fishing harvest, commercial harvest being done at all. I mean, it was completely shut down. So that's never happened before. And, all the other rivers except for the ones that have what are called terminal fisheries or, hatchery fish, like in Ship Creek or Bird Creek, are threatened.
Yeah, wow. Just amazing. We cover these issues a lot here with Alaska shows, and I hear similar stories, similar issues in other parts of Alaska. Just really is astounding. President Leggett, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thanks. Glad to be here, and it's always great to attend, the Arctic Circle conference. in addition, to being the president of the tribe, I'm also the senior curator at the Anchorage Museum, and we do a lot at the Anchorage Museum to connect to our circumpolar partners, and I've had the chance to travel quite a bit throughout the Arctic, and so it's always good to meet new people, create new partnerships, and reestablish some of them that we've had.
1-800-996-2848. That is the number for listeners who would like to join our conversation today here, broadcasting live from the Arctic Encounter Summit in Anchorage, Alaska. Our next guest joins us now. He is seated here as well. Merle Apasangak. He is a Yupik elder and hunter. Merle, hello. Welcome to Native America Calling. Pleasure to have you today.
Oh, good morning. Yes, we are pleased to be here mostly because on behalf of our people, we're just individual vessels that advocate for our communities.
Well, Merle, I'm really fascinated. We've had you on the show before, and I always enjoy listening to you talk about your life being from Gamble. And how have you seen your community and other northern communities here in Alaska change throughout your lifetime? Again, we're talking about climate change, but we're also talking about economic expansion and just increasing political influence as well.
Yes, thank you for asking that. And, our community is Gamble is called Chivukak in our language. And we have faced many changes in the last 20 years, both in climate change, on the economic side, and the way our language has been weakened systematically by education mandate initially under the Bureau of Indian Affairs. That are more isolated than we are. And we notice that isolation has been a blessing to us, and it's been very difficult for us at the same time. Because nowadays we're more, our livelihood is more tied to employment, commercial development, economic development, versus how we used to live. Our ancestors used to live. They were self-sufficient.
Right, yeah, and that's something that's also really important for our listeners to understand, the number of people in Gamble who live a subsistence lifestyle. What are the biggest threats, do you think, that are presented to that way of life and that type of living there in Gamble? And what's your biggest concern for the future?
Well, the other community is Savunga as well. It's like we're from the same bloodlines that have currently our population is such that we're the same people, Gamble and Savunga. But anyway, seems like climate change has been a very hard challenge because I remember in the 1980s when we used to fish at Ketlingok Bay, and we would fish and crab on the ice, shore-fast ice.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, there were like 25 to 30 people crabbing that day. And this one man, our uncle, Preston Apangalo, came to us young guys, and he said nothing but observed our fishing holes. And he said, looks like our waters are warming. And he just went back. And we were puzzled by that, But little did we know that he was right. Our waters have been warming. And much later we were behind the curve. But now everything is coming together because of what our elders told of us. What was, what is, and what is to come. Because our oral history still lives. It's still alive.
That is a powerful story, Merle. Really is. Really makes me think. And again, just hearing the words of an elder as you describe your uncle really moves me. Really moves me. I want to bring another guest into our conversation who is also seated with us here today, Vi Waihi. She is a grandmother and the Environmental Health and Justice Program Director at the Alaska Community Action on Toxics. And she is Yupik from St. Lawrence Island, Alaska. Vi, you've been on the show before as well. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me again. My name is Paunak. I'm the daughter of the late John and Della Waki. My appa was Waki from Pungok Island, Gangerami clan. My New York grandmother, Ayoklik, is Uwali clan. I'm a Sivokok Yupik grandmother. And I live and work here in Anchorage on the unceded territories of the Dena'ina people. And Native Villages Sivunga Tribal Citizen, Environmental Health and Justice Director with Alaska Community Action on Toxics.
Now, you're based here in Anchorage. However, you work with villages across Alaska, and you research the risk of contamination and health effects of microplastics. Let's start with your own community on St. Lawrence Island and a defunct World War II facility that poses health risks to the community.
This project began because a former health aide started noticing high rates of cancers, low birth weight babies, miscarriages, and stillbirths in our families that lived, worked, or camped at one of the two former bases. She tried to get help for our people for 20 years. It fell on deaf ears. So she met our executive director at Alaska Community Action on Toxics here in Anchorage at a women's conference. And that was the first time anybody listened to her. And this is how this project began. And we are continuing her work. And we now know that our people have 4 to 10 times higher PCBs in the blood of our people than the average American in the lower 48. So there are over 700 formerly used defense sites in Alaska alone. There's 32 in the Norton Sound region, and these sites have never been properly characterized, and the cleanups have been prematurely closed. So the burden of proof was put on my people. We partner with our tribe. They help design the research, Native Village Gamble, Native Village Sivunga. This data belongs to our people, but they want us to share, knowing that we're not the only community whose lands, airs, and waters and the health of our people has been harmed.
And another component to this issue here is that you've also found that much of the subsistence food in your region is not safe to eat. Tell me about the threats on that front and what goes into rectifying that issue.
At the direction of our leadership, when we learned the higher PCB levels in our people, they wanted to know how, including the legacy military toxics, others may be harming the health and well-being of our people. So at their direction, we collected over 300 samples of everything we eat and tested one batch for PCBs, the other for heavy metals. And it was very alarming to learn that our main foods, the marine mammals, the bowhead whale, walrus, and seals, the blubber and rendered oil have very high levels of PCBs at levels we should not be eating it for excess cancer risk. But the most important part here is that our people still feel the benefits outweigh the risks. It's our identity, it's our way of life. It's not something we can separate ourselves from. So these are burdens we didn't create. And with the warming of the globe, the POPs, or persistent organic pollutants, that are causing these high rates of contaminants in our marine mammals, as I mentioned, are burdens we didn't create. And it's so important that my message here at the Arctic Encounter is that we need more discussions on how we need to make sure that measures are in place to protect Arctic Indigenous people who are very vulnerable to persistent organic pollutants. At the Stockholm Convention, the only legally binding treaty ratified by over 180 nations, and the U.S. is not even a party.
We're joined here today at the Arctic Encounter Summit by Yupik elders Vi Waihi and Merle Epasingok. And we're going to take another short break. We'll come back and we'll continue our conversation learning about some of these issues with regard to risks to the subsistence lifestyle in Alaska Native villages. Listeners can join us. The number is 1-800-99-NATIVE. Pick up your phone, give us a call. We have our producers standing by waiting for listener feedback, listener input to join our conversation here today at Native America Calling. Again, broadcasting live from Anchorage, Alaska at the Dena'ina Civic and Convention Center at the Arctic Encounter Summit. This is an annual event here in Anchorage. We were here last year and we're here again this year. So listeners, stay with us and we'll be right back.
Support from Davis Keelan Law Firm, a New Mexico firm standing with Native families suffering catastrophic loss. When tragedy strikes Indian country, Davis Keelan fights to restore stability, dignity, and justice, bringing a voice to Native families and communities for 20 years. More information, daviskeelan.com.
Need an actionable plan to achieve your goals? Kaufman & Associates strengthens Native organizations through culturally grounded strategic planning. More at kaufmaninc.com, KAUFFMANINC.com.
You are listening to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. We're speaking with Yupik elders from St. Lawrence Island, Alaska, on the future of subsistence hunting and gathering and also environmental threats in the community. Still plenty of time for any listeners who would like to join us. We are at 1-800-996-2848. That's also 1-800-99-NATIVE. And a reminder, you can listen back to this show and all other Native America Calling shows on our website and all major podcast platforms. One of our guests today, Merle Epasingok, is here. He's from Gamble. And Merle, one of the things that I find really fascinating you amongst so many other experiences you've had is that you are one of the last whaling captains to sail for whales in a walrus skin boat. And for those not familiar, how significant is that type of fishing, and what's been lost now with relying on motorized boats in contemporary times?
Biodegradable, and they were silent. I cannot believe that when I was a young child, when my dad first took me out, how the wind was harvested for such an endeavor of hunting whales. So we were the last ones with my brother's crew on April 16, 2010 to sail for whales. There were many whales that day, but we did not harvest one because, it was late in the day and it had been snowing the whole day, and then by the time it cleared up, the weather cleared up, we found out there were many whales. So we ended up going home for the night because it was past 10 p.m. and that's the last time anyone sailed for whales. But the previous year, the late whaling captain Thomas Antalmi, he was the last whaler to harvest a whale under sail with a walrus skin.
Wow. Just a wealth of knowledge on our show today here from Yupik elders Merle and Vi. 1-800-99-NATIVE, the number for folks who would like to join us today. And I want to bring another guest into our conversation now who joins us here at the Arctic Encounter Summit, Dr. Sarah Olsvik. And she is the chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, and she is Greenlandic Inuit. Dr. Olsvik, welcome back to the show. It's a pleasure to have you back. Well, tell me how the summit's going, and what are you most focused on? What are you taking away?
So I actually just arrived because I had to be in Nuuk, Kalaallit Greenland on Tuesday, where we had the National Inuit Circumpolar Council Branch General Assembly preparing for our big international General Assembly this summer. And so I traveled in a very, very quick route. It took 17 hours from Nuuk to Anchorage, arriving yesterday. So I just walked into the convention center, and I'm very much looking forward to engaging in dialogue with everyone here. And so I'm happy to be here finally in Anchorage again.
Well, I'll tell you, for a transatlantic flight, you look absolutely extremely well rested and energized, ready to go. I'm impressed. Tell me more about the Inuit Circumpolar Council. What issues would you like to address here at the summit?
So I've been invited to contribute to a panel mostly on economic development, but from the Inuit Circumpolar Council right from our establishment in 1977, and throughout all of our General Assemblies since then. We will celebrate 50 years of ICC's existence next year. Throughout all of those 50 years, we have been focusing on the rights of Inuit, both in terms of our national branches and the life we lead in 4 very different nation states, but also as a unity of Inuit across state borders. Of course, we were divided by the establishment of states through colonization and through militarization. So our main purpose is to ensure that we can continue working together as Inuit across those state borders. And that is increasingly a challenge these years. Being from Kalaallit Greenland, we are clearly experiencing the pressure of the changes we see in the world, including here in the U.S. But environmental protection and our access to continue to live from the resources that are in our regions, in our waters, and in our lands is also a main objective of the Inuit Circumpolar Council right from the beginning. So protecting our environment and ensuring that we, as we've been doing for time immemorial, can continue in the future for time immemorial to be able to live from our resources and therefore protect our land.
Dr. Olsvik, we had a guest earlier today on the show, and he mentioned that at the last Arctic Encounter Summit, there was a different energy at the conference, and specifically with regard to threats, with regard to the United States possibly taking over Greenland. I'd like to hear from you with in terms of the status of what that's like in Greenland right now. Obviously, that's cooled down. The rhetoric has cooled down substantially, but are you folks still concerned, and are there still thoughts with regard to what could potentially happen in the future?
Definitely, and our history in Kalaallit also goes thousands of years back. Migrations of Inuit, immigration from the different waves of Inuit that came into the island of Kalaallit over time has been ongoing for thousands of years, and this is truly a time where we are seeing the consequences of Inuit also having been colonized, and we've clearly rejected this form of colonialist and imperialist approach to us as peoples, as a people, the people of Kalaallit. We enjoy self-government within the Kingdom of Denmark. We've worked hard over the past many, many years, and especially the past 50 years, to establish the self-government we have today. And so we control our resources from our own parliament and our own government in Kalaallit, where the vast majority of us are Inuit. 90% of us are Inuit. So this has really been 2 challenging years, these past 2 years, and especially this year, 2026, started off very concerning. And I would say that mostly our children and our elders are very, very anxious to what can happen, whereas maybe us who are more involved in politics can see that, as you say, it's cooled down a little, and I know that there are good diplomatic talks in between Kalaallit Nunaat, the government, Naalakkersuisut, the government of the US and the government of Denmark, and we are looking to see how these negotiations will, what they will result in. But the whole thing has really created a very, very strong unity among our people. And we've seen that unity across differences of generations, across differences of political parties. And I think that's the good thing that's come out of this, is that we have really stood strong and united. And we've also demonstrated our perseverance in continuing to call for all our rights to be upheld, and especially our right of self-determination.
And what about with the Kingdom of Denmark? Have those relationships been strengthened since these threats by the United States, or have they been weakened, or have they remained the same? I'm curious to know how that dynamic is playing out as well.
We recently saw an election to the Danish parliament, and Kalaallit Nunaat Greenland holds 2 seats to the Danish parliament. And my clear sort of takeaway from those weeks of election campaign, watching the parties, listening to the candidates, and also seeing the 2 that were elected, there is a challenge within the Kingdom of Denmark that goes back many years. But we've been able to solve our challenges and work together based on mutual respect, based on international law, ensuring that we have a legal ground and basis for the relationship we have between Kalaallit Nunaat and Denmark. And yes, there are challenges, and it will continue to be complex. We've seen the revelation of the IOD program, for example, where the state of Denmark introduced a program to insert IODs in what ended up to be half of the women and girls in childbearing age in the 60s and 70s. We are seeing big inquiries now on other consequences of the colonization from the Danish state. So we are also seeing an era where we are speaking more openly about this relationship and also the dark sides of this relationship. And that really needs space and respect, that we are going through a time where a lot of trauma is being experienced by a lot of people in Kalaallit Nunaat, because we have started talking about these things that have for many years been taboo and not been spoken about. So we've also called from the Inuit Circumpolar Council for respect for the differences we have across these states that we live in, and those relationships we have with the states cannot be compared to each other. We reject to be recolonized, and we reject also that there should be such a thing as a better colonizer. There is no such a thing as a better colonizer. So we really do demand respect and a dignified dialogue about those things that we carry with us and we need to work on in the future.
No such thing as a better colonizer. I think that's really going to resonate with a lot of our listeners who are tuning into the show right now. Dr. Olsvig, a big focus of the Arctic Encounter Summit, of course, is oil and gas exploration. And we had some folks on the show yesterday representing Alaska Native villages who are invested in the fossil fuel industry. And I know you have been a big voice in pushing away from fossil fuels. And I'm curious to know how that effort is going in Greenland.
In Kalaallit Nunaat Greenland, there's a reluctance to pursue offshore oil and gas exploration. There is a willingness and a consensus around developing the mineral extraction area and possibly oil extraction on land. It is a very disputed thing, as it is among all peoples, I believe, and especially us who live so much from the living resources, continuing also to do hunting both on land and at sea. And so I think that that's going to be very, deep and serious and important discussions in the years to come in Kalaallit Nunaat as well, because we're seeing an increased interest in our land and our resources, as you know. And this has also sparked renewed debates about the prospects of possible resource development. There is a standing consensus to say no to uranium mining and also no to offshore oil and gas. I think the thing that we share as Inuit across the board is that we also on that area, of course, call for the full respect of our right of self-determination to manage our own resources. And I think it's important for us all to really think carefully about how we want to use that right of self-determination that we've had inherently for generations and generations, and ensure that in whatever we do, we leave our lands and our resources and our environment in the hands of the next generation in a better state than how we took them from, we received them from the previous generations. And that's really the challenge for us, seeing also the pressure of climate change. But the foundation of all that we do must be our right of self-determination. And I think we share a challenge across Inuit Nunat to ensure that we have democratic principles and decision-making processes that are sound and take into account all our citizens and Inuit across our homelands.
You've also emphasized at UN forums for countries to adopt Inuit knowledge systems to address climate solutions. How can other countries look to Greenland to mitigate the threats of climate change?
Well, first and foremost, as Inuit, not just from Kalaallit Nunaat, Greenland, but from across all of Inuit Nunaat, we were among the first to call on the states to recognize that the climate and environment around us was changing already decades ago. And so now it's important, I think, to see how we've been able to push states to establish something like the UN Convention on the on climate change, Framework Convention on Climate Change, but also some of the instruments under that are specific for indigenous peoples. And the worrying thing right now is that we're seeing states that are sort of moving away from those fora and taking part in the collective global work we need to do to address climate change. And so I think in Kalaallit Nunaat we have a very deep understanding of the consequences of climate change, because as we see here in Alaska, when the ground beneath us is melting, it's really posing a big security threat to us. And I continue to see that as the biggest security threat that we face as Inuit across the board. When we don't have sea ice, we lose the infrastructure, we lose the access to go hunting and fishing in the wintertime. When permafrost thaws and weather is more unpredictable and more extreme, we see the flooding that we've seen in Western Alaska and the relocations that then need also to happen as this change is continuing. So this is really something we share. And Kalaallit Nunaat Greenland chose 2 years ago to also independently from Denmark to sign the Paris Agreement on climate change. And I think that was an important step also for us to take co-responsibility to address and act on climate change.
Okay. We're going to wind down the show here. We're going to wrap in a couple of minutes, but I couldn't help noticing when you walked up a few moments ago, you gave Merle a big hug. And I know you know these folks, and it must be nice to be able to reconnect at events like this. And I imagine you have so much in common, but yet at the same time, you represent different countries, you have different lived experiences. What's it like just to collaborate with other Native people here at the summit?
I was just also walking down the street and seeing someone I felt, these people are like people from home, we look the same, and I always feel home when I go visit other Inuit, and I hope it's the same when other Inuit visit Kalaallit Nunaat. So I'm just happy to see everyone again.
It's an honor to see you again, and when I first met you, my heart was warmed knowing how you're fighting for our people, and it's been an honor to learn from you and to hear you advocate for our life ways, our lands, airs, and water, and the health and well-being of our people, as well as with Merle. I have a lot of respect for him. He gives us advice and guidance. We have on our Protecting Future Generations project. So these are our knowledge holders who give us direction and advice as we come to these rooms to make sure that our voices are heard.
And with that, we've reached the end of our hour, so we're going to have to wrap up. And I want to thank all of our guests who joined us today. Of course, we led off with President Aaron Leggett, and now we're going to wrap up with Vai Waihi, Merle Apasangok and Dr. Sarah Olsvig. So appreciate you all coming in this morning, taking the time to talk with us and educate our listeners. And please, folks, join us again tomorrow. We'll be here for our final live broadcast at Day 3 of the Arctic Encounter Summit. Until then, I'm your host, Sean Spruce. You've been listening to the one, the only Native America Calling. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Colleges and universities support their students in countless ways. They say I believe and offer help before it's asked.
Hear that? That's everything tribal college faculty do for their students on Fast Forward. Because if one tried to say it in real time, they'd be here all day. They teach, guide, comfort, and connect. And for that, the community is grateful. Learn more at mostthoroughjobdescription.com. The American Indian College Fund supports this program.
They give extensions, cheer progress, share laughter, create calm, and allow reflection. They inspire hope, share wisdom, guide gently, validate feelings.
Who protects Indian country? Amerind does. As the only 100% tribally owned insurance carrier, Amerind helps strengthen tribal communities by providing reliable insurance coverage and keeping dollars in Indian country. From property and liability to commercial auto and tribal workers' compensation, Amerind is here to protect what matters. Celebrating 40 years of serving Indian country. Learn more at amerind.com. That's AMERIND.com.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Kawanak Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.